Anyway, moving on. What's it like to be multilingual? Well, I'll tell you. For some context, I obviously speak English y también hablo español. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Je comprends un petit français. Mut suomi on tosi kova kieli. So I've illustrated my point. My two main languages are English and Spanish. And you're listening to me in English, so I'm going to keep it that way. What are the benefits of being multilingual, you may be wondering? Well, speaking multiple languages, the ones that I do mainly speak, English and Spanish, and let's attach German just for the sake of it, you basically have Europe on easy mode. Even if you don't learn a fourth or fifth language and you don't speak it, you can at least break it down and make sense of it. I may not be able to have a conversation in Swedish, for example, but I can read Swedish and basically understand what I'm reading because it's close to German, which is close to English. When I speak English and when I speak Spanish with English or Spanish people, there's kind of a different version of me in both situations. Obviously in Spain I'm going to be speaking Spanish, so the environment will influence that. But Spanish and Spanish people are very different to England and English people. So I find myself, when I'm speaking Spanish, I'm like, I don't know if I would actually say what I just said in England or in an English-speaking group, let's say. You sort of automatically have two different minds. If you have a third fluent language, then that's a third or a fourth, whatever. And it's not to say you develop multiple personality syndrome. It's just you can do something that a lot of people can't do. And we'll get into more of this, but it gives you more flexibility in other areas of life. And so in different languages, English and Spanish, I'm going to keep it to that, there's different sense of humor among Spanish culture and among English culture. And I get both. So and it's really hard for me to define exactly how English and Spanish humor are different. On a real basic level, there's a lot of sarcasm in English humor, and in Spanish humor there's a lot of absurdity. I think that's fair to say. And I love both. Whenever I get the opportunity to go to Spain and to speak Spanish, I crave it all the time. I miss it dearly, like an old friend. And when I end up having these laughs with people with this weird Spanish humor, weird to someone who's not Spanish, it's like this whole part of my brain lights up. And if I didn't have that, that would be a whole part of my brain that would be used maybe for something else, but it just would be absent. The reason why I speak multiple languages is because I grew up in Spain. And in doing so, I didn't just learn the language, I learned the culture. I learned their way of doing things, their ways of looking at things. And so from a reasonably young age, I already had two ways of looking at the world. Forget the language. It gave me a new mindset that I really value now because, again, having your mind opened to two different ways of looking at or doing things is only of benefit. And so having a bilingual brain or multilingual brain will make you better at seeing patterns, take that in whatever context you want, learning a musical instrument, for example, being able to analyze music in certain ways, which I do often. I'm a big fan of music, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And learning, like, anything. If you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But if you are a dog that is constantly performing very good tricks as a habit, as just part of the dog's nature, then it's going to be much more willing to learn more tricks in future. That's a weird analogy that I've just thought of on the spot, but it sort of makes sense. And so it's basically mental training on repeat that just happens. You don't have to sit down and do it. You don't have to work at it. It just comes. And it gives you a much more flexible mind and a much more intuitive ability to learn new things and to approach the world in a more open-minded sense, I guess. I think I'm right in saying that most people in the world only speak one language, and if they speak a second language, it's not fluently. I think that's most people. And those people will inevitably have a more rigid mindset than someone who speaks 5 different languages. Because they've only experienced life from one perspective. Like, if you only live in the same town your entire life, you're not going to understand anything about the next town along, right? But if you've moved around a lot, you're going to understand how different places operate. If you only speak one language your entire life, I mean, no shame in it. I think that's generally normal. You're going to be lacking a certain worldliness that bilingual people have. I mean, I was really lucky. I was really, really lucky to have had this experience when I was young. When, you know, my parents moved to Spain with me, thankfully. I was 8, 9, maybe, and chucked in Spanish schools immediately. And so within 3 years, I was basically fluent. Because I had to be. It was about survival. I needed the language. I needed to survive in school, which, trust me, it wasn't easy. Years later, I would look up people on Facebook or whatever that I went to primary school in the UK with. And they're still like in the same town or the same area. Maybe they've gone on holiday to Ibiza or something, but they've never really left where they were born. There's 2 different types of people in this world, where there's people like that have only stayed in one place their entire life, and there's other people who have traveled the world and seen loads of different places, whether that's traveling on a big tour for 3 months and, you know, going to Indonesia and India and all these different places, or having lived in a certain different place for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whatever. So by that point, you understand, even in your later years, you understand that society, the social norms, etc. These people who have only lived in one place, they have essentially a smaller mind, a smaller mindset, a more limited scope of imagination and understanding and empathy to a certain extent. You know, like I said, there's no shame in that. Your life is what it is. But being bilingual, multilingual, whatever, this is the world I know now. No matter where I go in life, no matter what happens in my life, I will always have this attitude of open-mindedness and ability to look at things in 3, 4 different ways, because that's how my mind developed when I was young. It's a blessing, really. And so with that in mind, I can instantly tell, as soon as I meet someone, if they are one of these 2 different people, if they've lived in the same place their whole life, or if they have moved around the world, they speak multiple languages, etc. I can't exactly pinpoint what it is, but I can, even without speaking to them, I can look at them and go, that person has traveled the world, or that person has not left the town that they were born in. I wish I could explain it, but it's just something I wanted to bring up because it's something I've noticed, where I've assumed that about people, and then I speak to them and I get to know them, and I'm entirely right, almost without fail. And that in itself is quite fascinating. You know, the expression, real recognizes real. I guess that's the same thing applies. So one thing that I've experienced with being this way is that it forces you, forces you is a kind of a brutal term, but it forces you to stay curious and to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that sounds bad, but in the long run, what that means is you're more able to adapt to certain situations, to different lifestyle changes, or, you know, things like this. You're more weathered to being uncomfortable. And that's a good thing, because that makes life easier later on. You know, if you only have an easy life your entire life and never experience anything bad or uncomfortable, the moment you do experience something bad or uncomfortable, it is going to destroy you. With this mindset, with this experience, things aren't as overwhelmingly daunting as they might be to someone else. So I bet you weren't expecting this when reading the name, what is it like being multilingual? I bet you weren't expecting anything this deep, because it's only really dawned on me in recent years, all of the benefits that being bilingual, multilingual, whatever, has. And I didn't expect them either, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought about what is the difference between me, who has lived in different countries and who speaks multiple languages. What's the difference between me and this other person who's done none of that? And through experience, I found that all of my assumptions are correct. Maybe there's exceptions to the rule, sure, but on average, I think I'm accurate in my assessment. So there are downsides. It's not all butterflies and rainbows. One thing that I have found, being not just multilingual, but living in different places over my life, is that I don't really feel at home in any one place. You know, people talk about my hometown, blah, blah, blah. I don't really have that. There's technically a place I was born, but I don't consider that home, and I haven't for a long, long time. And where I live now, the country that I live in now, I also don't really feel at home here. Which, as you might be able to understand, is an ongoing unsettling feeling that really will never go away, I don't think. The alternative to that would be what I mentioned before, where living in the same place my entire life, no thank you. Now that I've experienced the world in all its multiple colours, and bearing this in mind, I've not travelled the entire world, I've been around, but I would not, knowing what I know now about being multicultural, I suppose, is I can't imagine now reversing all of that and only speaking English and only living in one place for my whole life. I cannot imagine it. However, those who have had that probably don't question it at all, and they can't imagine what my life's been like either. There's no right or wrong. I just know that I feel very blessed that my parents made the decision that they made when I was young, because I feel essentially smarter than I would have if I had have stayed in the UK. And so related to that, another downside is you can end up feeling like an outsider wherever you go. And this is very much true. Where I live now, I feel like an outsider, because ironically, here, I don't speak the language. But that's because it's a notoriously impossible language to learn, and it's incredibly frustrating for someone like me who is very good at languages. So I feel excluded from society here in a sense. Luckily, most people here speak English, and that's part of the reason why I haven't learned the language, I think. But if I go to Spain, that is the place I would consider home the most, because that's where I grew up, and I love the environment. I love the sea, I love the sun, it's beautiful, I love it, I miss it. But when I go there, people look at me, and they can see I'm not Spanish. So they quickly assume, wrongly, that I'm a holidaymaker. And that I don't speak the language, and I'm just a stupid foreigner. And then the moment I speak to them, I see their face light up, and they're like, whoa, I did not expect that. And I like that, but there's also, I don't like the assumption that I would guess they have, that I am just a stupid foreigner, right? And if I go back to the UK, that doesn't feel like home at all. It hasn't for a long time. I don't like the UK. It's one reason why I don't live there. It didn't treat me well. So I feel like an outsider in my own country. That said, if I ever do go back to the UK, which is highly unlikely, that will be a place where I know I can just walk up to anyone and they will probably speak English. Probably. There'll be a sort of a mutual understanding because we're both English, you know, whatever that is. It's there, whereas it's not here, and it sort of is in Spain, but someone has to get to know me a little bit first before that'll happen, because of my appearance, right? So I feel like an outsider on planet Earth, basically. So that's, you know, that's not the best thing in the world, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make for having the mindset that I have. Going back to what I was saying about learning skills and being uncomfortable, In a sense, I find a lot of frustration with people that I know well that haven't had that experience of living in different countries and speaking multiple languages and engaging in a different culture. Sometimes those people can be frustrating because there's certain things, because I can look at one situation in multiple ways, they cannot. And to me, it's so incredibly obvious because of how my brain's developed. I've got these little pockets of different cultures, and I can average out what each one would do in that certain situation, I guess. But this person only has one point of reference. It's not their fault. It's just their life experience, or lack thereof, maybe. And so I'm not saying I'm better than certain people. That's not what I'm implying. I've a greater ability to adapt and to, again, look at a situation multiple ways that other people don't possess. I find their inability to look at a situation like I do, I find frustration in that. And they probably find frustration in me having the opposite. I don't know if I'm explaining myself right, but, because they have this rigid mindset of one culture, there's, say, 3 options to deal with one situation, right? Or to approach a topic. Whereas in my head, there's like 17 different possible approaches. And so if I average out those different approaches, that's probably a more informed and reasonable approach to whatever it is than the 3 rigid ones. I hope that makes sense, because that's a really hard thing to explain to someone. In general, if you only speak one language, then it's going to be even harder for you to understand, I suppose. But I hope this has been informative. And I'm guessing you didn't expect all of these different angles and perspectives from someone talking about language, where, realistically, I didn't actually speak about language at all. It was more how language forms your brain, which was kind of the point. If you enjoyed what you heard, then please subscribe, and thank you for listening. Anyway, moving on.